She had come to treat his brother, and she had planned to leave before the first hard snow. The brother's name was Alton, and he was 19, and he had been working the Muir operation for his first full season when he came down with the fever in the third week of October. The fever was the kind that started as a minor thing and became a less minor thing across the first 2 days. And by the third day, it was the kind of fever that made his employer send a rider 2 hours south to find whoever the rider could find who knew something about fevers. The rider came back with Marin Wick, who was 33 and had been treating people in this part of the country for 9 years, moving between settlements and homesteads and operations wherever the need was. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late October with her kit and her experience and the specific manner of a woman who had been called to fevers before and knew what they required and was not going to pretend she did not know or that she was less certain than she was. What Alton's fever required was 4 days of the treatment she administered, which was the treatment that fevers of this specific type and progression required, and she knew the type and the progression from 9 years of treating fevers in country where fevers sometimes went wrong when they were not treated correctly. She knew what correct looked like, and she administered it. Alton was cooperative, which was the quality in a patient that made the work go well, which was that he did what she told him to do and did not argue and did not try to manage his own fever with home remedies that would have complicated the treatment or contradicted it. He was young and not yet stupid about his own health, which was a quality that some people had when they were young and lost when they were older and became certain they knew better than the person who had spent 9 years learning what to do. After the 4 days of treatment, she required 2 more days of rest and 1 more day of observation, which was the day she watched for the specific signs that told her the break was going to hold and not relapse. She watched for those signs on the 7th day, and the signs were present, and she said the fever had broken fully and the break was going to hold. 7 days from arrival to the day she would say the fever had broken and the break was going to hold. She had intended to be back south before the end of the first week. On the 5th day, the snow came. It came the way the serious snow came at this elevation, which was overnight and committed, and in the morning it was the kind that did not ask permission and did not consult schedules. Not the early season dusting that a late October snow sometimes produced. The kind of snow that arrived with the intention of staying, that came down through the night and the next morning and covered the road south in the way that made the road south a theory rather than a road. She stood at the window of the Muir house on the morning of the 6th day and looked at the theory of the road. The assessment she made was the practical one. The road south was covered at a depth that would take a horse 2 hours to cover in good conditions, and was not good conditions, and the temperature was the temperature that said the snow was not going to become any more cooperative by afternoon, and she was a person who made accurate assessments of situations and acted on them accordingly. The situation was that she was not going south today. She was not going south this week. The assessment was that clear. His name was Thad Muir, and he was 44, and he had been running the Muir operation since he was 31, which was the year his father had decided the operation needed someone who was going to be running it for the next 30 years rather than the next 5, and had handed it over and stepped back and moved to the settlement 2 hours south where he had a sister. Thad had been running the operation correctly since, which was the way he had been raised to run it and the way his father had run it, which was without drama and without shortcuts, and with the specific understanding that a well-run operation was a well-run operation every day and not only on the days when it was convenient. He was not a man who cut things short when they needed to be done fully and was not a man who waited for someone else to identify what needed doing. He was the person who identified what needed doing and did it without requiring it to be noted, and the operation reflected this across every season, and it was in good standing because of it. He came into the main room on the morning of the 6th day and looked at the window and looked at her looking at the window. He said, "Stay till the snow clears." He said it the way he said things that were practical facts about what was going to happen. She said she had other patients. She said she had a woman south of the settlement who was in the last weeks of a pregnancy and who she was supposed to check on this week, and 2 others with ongoing situations that required monitoring. He said he knew that. He said he had sent a rider south the previous evening before the snow closed the road completely. And the rider had taken a letter to the settlement informing the people she had named in the letter that she was not going to be able to come through until the road opened. He said he had written down the names she had mentioned across the week and had included them all. She said he had done that without asking her first. She said it in the tone of a person noting a fact, not in the tone of a person who was objecting to the fact. He said he had done it without asking her because it had been the correct thing to do and it had needed to be done before the road closed and she had been occupied with Alton and he had been available. He said the road was going to be closed for at least a week and probably longer, and she was welcome in the house for as long as the road was closed, and Alton was not done with his full recovery, and her presence here was useful. She said useful was one way to put it. She said she was going to trust that it was the accurate way and also that it was a reasonable arrangement for the week ahead. He said it was the accurate way. He said she was welcome to put it differently if a different word fit better. She did not put it differently. The word he had chosen was the word she would have chosen. She stayed. This is Dusty Vows, where he said stay till the snow clears in the 1st October when the road closed and she was already there, and she stayed till the snow cleared and then stayed for Dobbs Hand, and then stayed for the week of Dobbs Hand, and then stayed through the first winter and the spring after it, and the autumn, and the second winter, and the third winter, and the fourth winter, and he never asked her to leave. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then back to the snow. The snow cleared in 10 days, which was longer than the week he had predicted and shorter than it could have been. By the time it cleared, Alton was fully recovered and the operation was running correctly, and Maren Wick had spent 10 days in the Muir house and had come to know the shape of it. It was the shape of a house run well by a person who lived in it and managed it correctly, efficient and without the excess that accumulated in houses where things were left undone or let slide. A well-managed house. She noticed this in the same way she noticed everything, which was directly. She packed her kit on the morning the road opened, which was a Tuesday in early November, and the packing took 10 minutes because she had packed in 10 minutes and unpacked in 2 and packed again in 10 enough times across 9 years that the packing was the packing and did not require more time than it required. She was packed, and her kit was over her shoulder, and she had her hand on the door when the door opened from the other side. It was Dobb. Dobb was the man who ran the Muir operation alongside Thad, the senior hand, the one who had been here longer than the others and knew the operation at the level of knowing where every problem would appear before it appeared. He was standing in the door with his hat in his hands and the look of a person who needed something from the person who had what they needed, which was a doctor. And the hand he was holding awkwardly to one side was the hand that had been pinned under a gate that had come off its hinge that morning. She looked at the hand. She told Dobb to sit down and to keep still. She unpacked her kit. The packing that had taken 10 minutes to do was undone in 2. The hand required immediate attention and then 3 days of attention after the immediate. And she gave the hand what it required, and by the time Dobbs' hand was addressed correctly, the road south had 6 new inches on it from the snow that came at the beginning of November. She stood at the window and made the practical assessment. He said, "Stay till it clears." He did not say it the way he had said it the first time, which had been a request. He said it in the tone of a man stating a fact about what was happening, the way he stated facts about his operation, which was without inflection and without requiring agreement. She said she had patience. She said she had a woman in the last weeks of a pregnancy and 2 other ongoing situations that she had been managing. He said Dob was a patient, and the hand needed another week of attention, and the road was the road it was. She looked at him for a moment. She said the hand could manage with appropriate daily attention for the week, and it would be fine at the end of the week. He said then she should stay for the week and see to the appropriate daily attention, and at the end of the week the hand would be fine and the road would be assessed. She said she had other patients south, and the pregnant woman was in the last weeks, and she had told her she would be there. He said he would send a rider south if she wrote the word. He said word could get there in an afternoon if a rider left now. She was quiet for a moment. She said she would write the word. She said she would write what the pregnant woman's husband needed to know, and he could send the rider with it, and if the rider left before noon, the word would be there before dark. She said the pregnant woman had a husband, and the husband would get to the 2 hours south clinic if she was not available, and she would write that. He said that was a reasonable arrangement, and he would have the rider ready when she had the letter written. She stayed for the week. Tell me, when he sent the rider south the night before the snow closed the road, without asking her first, because it was the correct thing to do, and he was a man who did the correct thing without announcing it, did you see what that was? He was not managing her. He would not have presumed to manage her. He was managing the situation, which included her patients who needed to know she was not coming through, and he managed that part of the situation because someone needed to, and he was there and could. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now back to the road. By the time Dob's hand was fine, it was the 3rd week of November, and the road was the road it was going to be until spring, and she was in the room she had been in since October, and the operation was the operation it was, and there were people in the district who knew she was here and had begun to come to her. This was how the first winter happened. Not because she had decided to stay for the winter. She had not decided to stay for the winter. She had decided, in the specific way she made decisions, which was by assessing the situation accurately and responding to what it actually was rather than to what she had planned it to be. That the road was closed and Dob's hand needed attention, and the week would pass and she would assess the road again at the end of it. The week passed, and the road was the road it was going to be until spring, and by the end of the week the district knew she was there. A district that had no doctor and then had a doctor, even a temporary and unofficial one who had come for 7 days and had stayed through a closed road and a hand injury and a December delivery, was a district that responded to that change immediately and practically the way districts responded to any resource that had not been available before and that the absence of had cost them something. The Muir district had been paying the cost of having no doctor for years before October, and when October produced Maren Wick and November kept her and December confirmed her, the district was not going to let that go if it could hold it. People came. They came with what they had been managing on their own because there had been no one closer than 2 hours south who knew medicine, and managing on your own meant managing at the level your own knowledge allowed, which was not always sufficient. She received them without distinguishing between who could afford her and who could not, because that was not the distinction that mattered to her, and she had not made it a distinction in 9 years of working in places that did not have much. She did what she knew how to do. The things she knew how to do were sufficient for most of what the district needed, and for the things that were not, she was honest about it, and honest about what she could do in the absence of what she could not do. The people in the district trusted this. Honesty about the limits of knowledge was not something they had received reliably from the people who had come through before claiming to know medicine, and the people who had claimed to know more than they knew had cost the district things it could not get back. She was not that kind of person. She told them what she knew and what she did not know, and what she could do and what she could not do. And what she said she could do, she did, and what she said she could not do she was honest about, and told them what to do instead, and the combination of these things was what made the district trust her in the specific way a district trusted someone whose honesty had been tested and had not failed the test. She treated a child with an ear infection in the first week of December and 2 men with injuries from a fence repair that had gone badly in the same week. She treated a woman with a difficult delivery in the second week of December. The delivery was the delivery that made her name in the district. She had been called to the Rawle homestead at noon, and she did not come back to the Muir house until after 2 in the morning, and the delivery was difficult from the first hour, and became more difficult through the afternoon and through the evening, and remained difficult until it was not, which was at 1 in the morning when the child arrived and was alive and the mother was alive and everything that could have gone wrong had been addressed. Thad was in the main room when she came through the door at 2 in the morning. He had the fire going. He did not ask how it had gone. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and she sat down in the chair by the fire, and he put something warm in her hands, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the while was the right amount of time. The word about the December delivery spread the way word spread in a district that was far from any other help, which was quickly and completely, and after December of the first winter, there was no question of whether the district needed Maren Wick. There was only the question of where she would be, and she was at the Muir house, and the Muir house was where the district could reach her. The question was where she would stay, and the answer was the Muir house, which was where she had been since October and which had become, by February of the first winter, the place she came back to after every call. The district did not ask about the arrangement in the direct way that districts sometimes asked about arrangements. The district asked about it in the indirect way, which was in the way people asked about the Muir operation and the Muir house, and whether Maren Wick was going to be at the gathering, and whether she would be at the house if someone needed to get to her in the night. The district understood, by February of the first winter, that the answer to those questions was yes, she was going to be at the gathering, and yes, she was going to be at the house. The district accepted this understanding and built around it the way a district built around the facts of its geography, which was practically and without requiring anyone to explain why the fact had become the fact or whether it was going to remain the fact. She stayed through the first winter, all of it, from the late October of Alton's fever through to the end of March when the roads became the roads again, and the snow that had closed them became the mud that made them difficult in a different way. He had understood something by the end of the first winter that he had not understood on the October morning when she had arrived, and he had walked her to the fence to show her the horses she was not there for. What he had understood was that the arrangement he had called practical at the beginning was not going to stay practical in the sense of being temporary. He had meant the snow. He had looked at the woman who had come in October for Alton's fever and had stayed for the snow and had treated Dobbs' hand and had stayed for the week of Dobbs' hand and had treated the December delivery that had kept her for 14 hours and had stayed through the rest of the winter. And he had understood that what she was doing was not staying until the next convenient moment to leave. She was simply there. He had understood this and had said nothing about it, because saying something about it would have been the kind of thing you did when you wanted to put a condition on it, and he did not want to put a condition on it. He wanted her to be there. She was there. The not saying was the correct management of the situation. He did not ask her to stay for the spring. He did not ask her to go either, and the not asking worked the way not asking worked in a house where 2 people were managing things correctly without requiring everything to be said. She stayed for the spring because there were patients in the district, and because the district had come to know she was there and had stopped thinking of her as temporary. And a district that had stopped thinking of you as temporary had made a decision about you that deserved consideration. She stayed because the Muir house was where she was, and she was not being given a reason to be somewhere else. The staying for the spring was not a decision she made once. It was a decision she did not unmake, which is what most decisions were, at their core. She had been a traveling healer for 9 years before the first winter. 9 years of moving between settlements and homesteads and operations, following the need, which was never in one place long enough to build a practice in the conventional sense, but was always somewhere, and she was always following it. She had learned her medicine from a doctor in the East who had trained her formally for 2 years and then informally for 3 more, which was the 3 years she spent working alongside him, seeing patients, and learning what the seeing of patients actually produced in terms of knowledge, which was different from what reading about the seeing of patients produced. She had come west when she understood 2 things, which were that she had what he had to teach, and that what she knew was needed more in the places that had nothing than in the places that had something. She had made the correct assessment and had acted on it correctly, which was the way she did things, and the 9 years of the moving had been the 9 years of her acting on that assessment and finding that the assessment had been right. She had suited herself to the moving across 9 years, and the moving had suited her back, and the arrangement had worked because both sides of it were working. She moved light, carried what she needed, and nothing extra, made arrangements that did not require permanence. She had not owned furniture since she was 26. She had not had a room she thought of as hers since a little earlier than that. The first winter was the first winter she had stayed in one place for longer than a month, and she had stayed in the Muir house for 4 months before spring. She noticed the not moving the way she noticed everything she had not experienced before, which was carefully and without the urge to interpret it before she had observed it fully. What she noticed was that the not moving was not what she had expected, which was that she had expected it to feel like stopping. It did not feel like stopping. It felt like having somewhere to come back to, which was a different thing entirely. He was there every time she came back. Every call, every hour, every weather, every night she came back from a difficult call at 2 a.m. She came back and he was there, and over the course of the first winter the coming back and the being there had become the rhythm of the thing, and neither of them noted it, because noting it would have made it something other than what it was, which was simply what happened. He did not remark on the coming back in the way that would have made it remarkable. He did not say he was glad she was back or make an occasion of her return. He asked the practical question when it was warranted, which was whether the patient was going to need further attention, and the reason he asked was that he had taken on the habit of driving her to the calls that were far or in bad weather, and knowing whether the patient would need a return visit was a planning question. Otherwise, he was simply there. The house was warm. There was food if it was a mealtime and quiet if it was not, and the warmth and the food and the quiet were not things he performed. They were the conditions of the house when it was running correctly, and they were what she came back to. She was aware, through the first winter and into the spring and through the summer and into the autumn of the second winter, that she was coming back to something when she came back to the Muir house. She had not come back to anything in 9 years of moving. There had been places she returned to on circuit and people she treated more than once and operations she revisited year after year. And returning to a place was not the same as coming back to one. But returning to a place was different from coming back to one, and the difference was the specific quality of the return, which was either the quality of a person completing a transaction or the quality of a person arriving at the place they had been. She had not had the second quality in 9 years. She had it now. She came back to the Muir house from every call, and she was arriving at the place she had been, and she paid attention to this without concluding anything about it before she had observed it long enough to conclude correctly, which was the way she observed everything. She noticed this also. She had spent 9 years learning to notice what was happening around her patients and in the places she worked, because noticing correctly was the first part of doing anything correctly, and the noticing had become comprehensive. She noticed that he was there. She noticed the quality of the there, which was not performed and was not a service. It was simply the fact of him being in the house when she came back to it, and the house being the house it was when she came back to it, and the fact of both of these things being consistent across the winter without variation. She had spent 9 years working for people who were glad to have her when she arrived and who did not think about her when she was out on a call or between their operation and the next one. This was correct, and she had not required anything different from the arrangement, because the arrangement had been the work and she had been doing the work. This was correct, and she had not required anything different. She was there for the work, and she did the work, and she moved on, and the people she worked for had their own lives that were their lives, and she was passing through them. Thad Muir was not a person she was passing through. He was a person she came back to. The distinction was new, and she paid attention to it with the care she paid to things that were new, and what she understood by the end of the first winter was that she was not passing through the Muir house. She was in it. Tell me. When she came back from the difficult delivery in December, which she had been at for 14 hours, and he was in the main room with the fire going when she came through the door at 2 a.m, did you see what he had been doing for 14 hours? He had been there. He had not gone to bed. He had not assumed she was fine, and she would handle it, and he would see her in the morning. He had been in the main room with the fire going because she was going to come through the door eventually, and it was his job to make sure the room was warm when she did. That was not a small thing. That was a man who understood that the job of being where someone could come back to was a real job, and he was doing it. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now back to the Muir house. The second winter was different from the first winter in the specific way that the second time you did something was different from the first time, which was that you knew what you were doing and had stopped performing the question of whether you were going to do it. The first winter she had been a woman staying through the winter because the winter had arrived while she was there. The second winter she was a woman who was there for the winter. The difference was small in most of its externals and not small in all of the rest of it. She was at the Muir house through the second winter. It was not a decision she announced. She did not say to herself or to him that she was staying for the second winter. She was at the Muir house in October when the second winter's cold began, and in November when the snow came, and she was there. The question of leaving had been present in the spring in the specific way of a question that was there and was being observed and was not being acted on. She had observed it. She had not acted on it. He had not asked her about it. The question had been present through the spring and into the summer, and had the quality through those months of a question that was being answered by the accumulation of days in which it was not being acted on, and by the time the autumn came around again, the question had become a thing that had been answered without anyone needing to state the answer. He had not asked her to stay for the second winter. He had also not asked her to leave, which was the other thing he had not done that a different man in the same situation might have done, which was to note at some point in the spring or the summer that the arrangement had been for the winter and summer had arrived. He had not noted this. He had not noted it because the arrangement was working and the district needed her here and the house was as it was, and noting it would have been the kind of comment that a man made when he wanted the arrangement to end. And he did not want the arrangement to end. Neither of them named this. Both of them understood it. The understanding was the arrangement, and the arrangement was working, and neither of them was going to require it to be named in order to continue working. The second winter was the winter she stopped being a guest in any meaningful sense and became something that had no good name in the vocabulary of houses and people in houses. She was not a housekeeper. She did not keep his house. The house ran the way it had run before she arrived, which was well, because he ran it well, and she managed her own space, and her own kit, and her own schedule, and he managed his. And the managing did not require coordination beyond the practical kind, which was knowing whether she was going to be at dinner or out on a call, and whether the Aldrin place was going to need the wagon in the morning. That kind of coordination. The kind that two people did when they were living in the same house and it was practical to know what the other was doing. She was not a boarder. A boarder was a person who stayed at a place in exchange for payment and who would be somewhere else if a different accommodation were available. She was not paying him anything, and she would not have been somewhere else if a different accommodation were available. Because there was not a different accommodation available that included what this accommodation included, which was a man who was there, and the house was warm, and there was food and quiet, and she was not going to be somewhere else. She was not a relative. She was the person who was there the way he was there, which was because this was the house, and the house was where they were, and neither of them was going to be somewhere else. He brought her coffee in the mornings the second winter. Not because she had asked for it, and not as a gesture toward anything. He made coffee, and she was there, and he brought her coffee, because that was what happened when you made coffee and someone was there. He had been doing this without remarking on it, and she had been receiving it without remarking on it, and the coffee had become a fact of the mornings the way the fire in the main room and the kit on the shelf were facts of the mornings. The second winter had a quality of ease that the first winter had not had, though the first winter had not been hard. The ease was not the absence of difficulty. The ease was the quality of a thing that had been going on long enough to know itself, which was not because anything was easier, but because the ease was what had accumulated across a year of the first winter and the spring and the summer and the autumn. A year of coming back to the same house and the same fire going, and the same man in the main room who was there and was going to continue to be there. A year of the calls and the return from the calls and the practical coordination about the calls. A year of being somewhere specific rather than somewhere on the way to somewhere else. And a year of knowing that the somewhere specific was where she was going to be tomorrow and the day after that. The second winter had the ease of a thing that had been going on long enough to know what it was and did not need to perform the question of whether it was going to continue. She said something about it in February of the second winter. She came to the main room on a February morning and looked at the coffee on the table and looked at him. She said he did not have to bring her coffee every morning. She said she had not asked for it, and she was aware of the location of the coffee in this house. He said he knew that. She said she had 2 working hands, and she knew where the coffee pot was, and she knew how to use it, and had been using it for most of her adult life. He said he knew that too. He said he had watched her manage things considerably more complicated than a coffee pot for a year and a half, and he was aware that she was capable of managing the coffee. She was quiet with that. He said, Marin, said it in the tone he said the things he was being direct about, which was the same tone he had used for all of it across a year and a half. She said Thad. Said it in the same tone, which was the tone of the name of the man whose house she had been in for a year and a half and was going to continue to be in. His name for her, said the way a name sounded when it was the name of the woman who had arrived in late October for a fever and had stayed through the fever and through the 10 days of snow and through Dobbs' hand and through the December delivery that had gone 14 hours and had the whole district holding its breath, and who had stayed through the first winter and had not said she was staying for the spring and had simply stayed for the spring, and who was here in February of the second winter with her kit on the shelf and her coffee cup and her calls in the district and her way of coming back through the door at the end of every call and being there. Her name for him, said the way a name sounded, when it was the name of the man who had sent the rider south before the snow closed the road, without asking her permission because it had been the correct thing to do, and who had said stay till it clears not as a request, but as a statement of what was going to happen, and who had not asked her to stay for the spring and had not asked her to leave for. the spring, and had been in the main room at the end of 14 hours with the fire going because she was going to come through the door and the room was going to be warm when she did, and who had brought her coffee in the mornings the second winter without making it a thing. She said, "I have been here for a year and a half." She said it in the tone of someone noting a fact she had been noting privately for some time and had decided to note aloud. He said he knew. He said he had been here for every day of it and was aware of how long it was and intended to be here for whatever came after it. She said she had planned to leave before the first hard snow of the first winter, and she had not left before the first hard snow, and then she had not left after the first hard snow, and then she had not left in spring. He said he knew that too. He said the snow had other plans, and then Dobb had other plans, and then the district had other plans. And here they were. She said it was February of the second winter and she had 3 calls this week and she was still here. He said he could see that. He said he had been watching her still be here for a year and a half. She said she had 3 calls scheduled this week, which he already knew, and a 4th that was likely by Thursday based on a situation at the Orrell homestead that had been developing. He said he knew the 3. He said he would drive her to the Aldrin place, which was the far one. She said she knew he would. She said she had been relying on him driving her to the far one since November of the first year, and she intended to continue relying on it. He said he was glad she was here. He said it in the specific way he said the things he meant, which was directly and without qualification. She looked at him for a long moment in the February light, coming through the window at the low clear angle that February light came through, with the coffee on the table between them and her kit on the shelf, and 3 calls scheduled this week, and the 4th that was likely, and the district outside, and the operation around the house, and neither of them going anywhere. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was paying attention to, which was directly and without performing the paying attention or making an occasion of it. He was a man who paid attention correctly, which was to say that he paid attention to what was there rather than to what he wanted to be there, and the distinction was one she understood the importance of. She had been watching him pay attention correctly for a year and a half, and it had been one of the first things she had noticed about him. On the first walk to the paddock, when he had asked the questions that told her what a person needed to know about their horses, rather than the questions that made a person seem knowledgeable. She said, "I know." She said she had known he was glad she was here from approximately the second week of the first winter, which was the week after the December delivery, when she had come through the door at 2 in the morning, and he had been in the main room with the fire going. She had known from the quality of his being there what the being there meant, which was not the being there of a man waiting up out of courtesy, but the being there of a man who needed to know she had come back through the door. She had known it and had treated it as the fact it was, which was the fact of a man who had been in the main room with the fire going for a year and a half and was going to continue to be there. She said she was going to continue to be here. She said it in the tone of a person stating a decision she had arrived at by having not left, as if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. A year and a half of not leaving was a year and a half of deciding to stay. And a year and a half of deciding to stay was what staying was. The third winter came, and she was there. The third winter was not the first winter, which had been the winter of a woman staying through a closed road, and it was not the second winter, which had been the winter of a woman who had stopped performing the question of whether she was staying. The third winter was the winter of a person who lived at the Muir House and had patients in the district and had calls to make and a room with her kit on the shelf and a man who brought her coffee in the mornings and was in the main room when she came back through the door. She had not planned the third winter. She had arrived at it the way you arrived at things you had not planned, which was by making the adjacent decisions. And the adjacent decisions had been not leaving in spring and not leaving in summer and not leaving in autumn, and the autumn of the second year had become the third winter. The fourth winter came, and she was there, the way she had been there for the third winter and the second winter and the first winter. Because there was the place she was. He had said stay till the snow clears in the 1st October, with the practical intention of a man making a practical arrangement, and she had stayed till the snow cleared, and then had stayed for Dobbs' hand, and then had stayed for the week of Dobbs' hand, and then had stayed because the road was the road it was going to be until spring and the district needed her, and she was here. The first winter had been a thing she had not decided. The second winter had been a thing she had not undecided. The third winter had been the winter of a person who was in the place they were. The fourth winter was simply where she was and he was, and neither of them was going to explain it differently than that, because differently was not how it was. He had said stay till the snow clears in the 1st October, and the snow had cleared and come again and cleared again and come again, and she was there for the clearing and the coming and the clearing, 3 more winters of all of it, and she was going to be there for the winters after that. She had come to the Muir house in late October 3 years ago to treat a fever for 7 days, and she was still here in the 4th October, watching the first snow of the 4th winter come down the way it came down at this elevation, which was seriously and with intention. She was not watching it from the window the way she had watched the first snow of the first winter, which was with the practical calculation of a woman who needed to assess a road and make a decision about it. She was watching it from the window with her coffee and her kit on the shelf behind her, and her calls for the week in her mind and the man in the room behind her who would drive her to the far ones, and she was watching it in the way a person watched weather from inside a place that was theirs to be inside, which was without the calculation she had stood at this same window doing 3 years ago, when the road had been the question and the snow had been the answer. He said stay till the snow clears. He said it the way he said it the first time, which was practically, and it meant the same thing now that it had meant in the 1st October, which was stay. And she was going to. She said, she knew. She said she was not going anywhere in the 4th winter the way she had not gone anywhere in the 3rd winter and the 2nd winter and the 1st winter after the snow came and Dobb hurt his hand and the December delivery went 14 hours. He said he knew that. He said he had known it for 3 winters, and he had relied on knowing it for 3 winters, and he was going to continue to rely on it. She said she had known it for approximately the same amount of time. She said she had known it since approximately February of the 1st winter, and had been here since February of the 1st winter, which was 3 years and 2 months, and the arithmetic was simple, and she had known what the arithmetic meant since the morning she had done it the first time, which was February of the 1st winter at the window, when the snow was still the snow it had been and she was still there. The snow was coming down outside, and neither of them was going to be somewhere else, and the 4th winter was the 4th winter, and that was what it was. The 4th winter was around them, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held.